Good evening and welcome to the 15th edition of Gather, ASU Care's monthly storytelling sessions. And these series are always held on the last Wednesday of the month. My name is Diana Dinshaw, and I am going to be your guest host for tonight's storytelling series. I am a Pakistani American, and I've lived here in Arizona for 12 years. I stumbled across storytelling in 2016, and since then, storytelling has literally and figuratively given me a voice. I now teach the art of storytelling at the South Mountain Community College, and I also produce and host the Third Doll Storytelling series, which is held every month, an online virtual storytelling series. Today, after the two wonderful storytellers will tell their personal stories, I will be closing the storytelling portion of the program with a folk tale, which aligns with this month's theme, What Almost Was. Tonight, we are broadcasting live from this magnificent, historic ASU Care and have two gifted storytellers, Mario Avent and Nick Newberry. And they will be telling their personal stories of what almost was. To me, it is always fascinating to see how our experiences are similar and different, and the things we as people may have in common. After we share our stories, we'll end the show with a conversation and some question and answers featuring your questions. So please send your questions in the comments anytime during the show. We love hearing from you. We encourage you to support our storytellers with your positive comments, emojis, and more in the chat. So our first personal storyteller tonight is Mario Avent. Mario is from Colorado. He is an avid comic book and Star Wars geek, and he loves storytelling. And I know that because I have personally heard some of his wonderful stories. Mario is a military veteran, and he was stationed in Germany with his wife. Then Mario moved to Arizona in 2014, and he moved here because he loves the weather, except summer, because it's too hot. Mario has his BA in art from ASU, and before COVID, he was the MC and co-producer of Slice of Storytelling and Cake at Space 55 with Kathy Nakagowski. Welcome, Mario.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I love music. And when I was younger, I was one of those kids that I would go into the kitchen and I would get that big soup pot and I would turn it upside down and I would get the wooden spoons, whatever I could find, and then just bang on it for hours on end. Just driving my mom crazy. Sorry, Mama, but I had to do it because I love music that much. And I would listen to music all the time, and I wanted to be part of it. And throughout all the music, there was instruments. But I wasn't very good at playing instruments, and I wanted to be part of that musical world. And then growing up, listening to music, I heard this song. And one of the artists on the song was this guy named Doug E. Fresh. Some people call him the human beatboxer, the innovator of beatboxing. Beatboxing is what they call vocal percussion, or just making music with your mouth. And he did this song with this rapper, this artist named Slick Rick. Some of you might have heard it. It went something like, la-di-da-di, la-di-da-di, la-di, la-di, la-di-da-di, who likes to party, who don't cause trouble, we don't bother nobody. And Dougie Fresh just kept going on with his beats and his sound. And I loved it. And I knew that's how I can make music with my mouth. That is how I was going to join this revolution of music. That was part of my soul. And I kept listening to more music and listening for more beatboxers, and you know what, there wasn't a lot of out there. And there was Biz Markie, and he kept reminding me to make music with your mouth. And there was one day where, you know, I was playing video games and still listening to music on video games, and there was this game, NBA Live 2000. And as I'm playing it, I heard this song. All I know is a bad mother. All I know what's about to bounce the beats now. And I was like, oh my God, who was that? It sounded like they were doing beatboxing, but I wasn't sure that really sounded like music. And I looked it up, and it was this artist named Rozelle, the champion beatboxer. And I went to listen to some of his CDs, and CDs back then, you know, kind of, yeah. And I listened to this one, and he had this song. And he did the song, and he did the beatboxing. And, oh man, he did both of them at the same time. The song kind of sounded like, if your mother only knew, if your mother only knew. And then he stopped everything, and he did both at the same time. Well, that just tripped me out. I did not know this could happen. And I tried it, and I couldn't do it like he did, but I did find a couple songs I could try it with. You know, like one of the Fuji songs. Strumming my pain with his finger, killing my life with his words, killing me softly with his song, killing me softly. And I kept going, and it sounded okay, but you know, it's what I could do. Well, later on, my brother, he had this group in high school, this a cappella group called Logic. And they needed somebody to do vocal percussions, beatboxing, for this Boyz II Men song called Thank You. And my brother asked me, Mario, do you think that you could do this? Oh my God, I will have a chance to put my beatboxing to music, to make this music with my mouth? And I said, of course I could. And even though I was his brother, he still made me audition for it. So when I auditioned, it sounded something like this. It's like this. It's like this. And they loved it, and I was part of the group, and we kept on making music with my mouth for years. Well, then people get older, and the group split. We had our own things to do. Became an adult, and I had to work. I went to the military, and there was no room for beatboxing, no use for beatboxing for what I was doing. And so I kind of lost my soul. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where I was. It was just lost. And so when I was stationed in Germany, and I got out of the military, my wife and I flew all the way to Arizona. And then that's when we went to school. We went to South Mountain Community College. And my wife, she was in this class that was taught by Professor Marilyn Torres called The Art of Storytelling. And at the time, they were doing this event called the Myth and Roman Throwdown, where there's 26 contestants. Each person has a letter. They either do a Roman or a Greek myth. And they got me to do it, and I did the letter K. I had no idea what storytelling was at all, but I did it anyway. Made my wife happy. Happy spouse, happy house. So I got on stage and I did 3 minutes of this story, and I ended with, if you smell what Kronos is cooking. And they loved it. They loved it so much that they asked me to do another story. This time was the African story. That was the theme. And so I picked a story from Zimbabwe. It was called The King of the Jungle. And when I read it, it wasn't even a whole page. This was a short story, but how was I gonna make this story longer? I had to make it at least 5 minutes. And I was asking people, and they're like, just make it your own. And then I asked my wife, and she said, you make all this music with your mouth, why don't you do that? And I got it back. My soul started to come back. I can make the music with my mouth again. Thank you so much. And so I got on stage, and I started the story. Once there was this lion in the middle of the jungle, and he was so arrogant. He walked over to the water hole. He brushed his mane back, and he looked in the water hole. He said, it's good to be the king of the jungle. And he roared to the jungle. He wanted everybody to know who he was. And when he roared, it sounded like, and I kept going. I did beatboxing for each of the animals and throughout the whole thing. And I kept doing stories, and I still continue to do stories today. But where would I have been if it wasn't for those innovators of beatboxing, like Dougie Fresh and Biz Markie and Rozelle? And where would I have been if music would just stuck to the instruments and not do anything with beatboxing? And so I thank you for listening to the story. I thank you for listening to the story. If you didn't hear me, let me rewind it. Thank you very much for listening to my story.
Mario, you have such a unique style of incorporating singing and beatboxing in your stories. How do you come up with these beatbox tunes? What inspires you?
So what inspires me is, like I said, I listen to different beatboxers, especially like Rozelle and Dougie Fresh, the Vat Boys, and I listen to like Biz Markie. I listen to the sounds that are around me, and then I try to imitate that. And then I think about what's going to go into the story, how can I make that story into beatboxing, and how can I make that story unique? And so if I can put the sound and the beatboxing together, sound is just music of the universe. That's all it is. Sound is music of the universe. And beatboxing is music. And so I can just put the two together, and whatever story that I do, I can put beatboxing to it. And that's how I do it. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mario, for your wonderful story.
Thank you very much.
Next up tonight with his story is Nick Newberry. Nick grew up in Hollywood, California, where his father was a motion picture art director. Nick came to Arizona to study at ASU and has lived here ever since. He works as an architect, architectural illustrator, and concept designer. Over the years, Nick has written plays for community theater, performed with other musicians, composed and recorded numerous songs and orchestral compositions, and painted travel watercolors. He has run 13 marathons. Now he walks. Nick is not famous, but he knows people who are famous. Or if you were to say it another way, there are famous people who know Nick. So he feels pretty good about it. He also feels very lucky to be married to May Cheney. Welcome, Nick.
"13 years ago, an international design competition was announced calling for the design of a memorial to be located in Washington, D.C., honoring Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. Wow, big wow. As an architect and a concept designer, I understood the value of competitions. I had entered several over the years up to this point. In a competition, you get to think big, you get to reach further, you get to reach for that higher ideal. Do you enter a competition to win? Well, of course you wish you could win. You try to win, but that's such a long shot. That hardly matters. High-profile competitions usually pull in 200 to 300 entries. There's lots of good ideas. There's lots of different ideas. You don't hang on the idea of winning. You get into it to make yourself better. So I went for this competition. The competition was probably the highest profile competition I ever experienced in my life. An important person, an important chapter of history, and a 5-star site in Washington, D.C., located on the alignment between the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial. Alignments are everything in Washington. This is prime territory, right on the edge of the tidal basin. Tidal basin is really a beautiful lake surrounded by 3,000 cherry trees. When you hear about the cherry trees in Washington, D.C., it's right there where this site was. The competition committee asked the competitors to consider 3 things: the movement, civil rights, the man, King, and the message, which would be in the words of Dr. King. They also asked us to abide by a couple of limitations, to honor the limitations. One is nothing that we design should be higher than 10 feet. We don't want a pyramid with a temple on top. This is a park-like environment. And the other thing is those cherry trees that run along one side of the site, those are sacred. They cannot be touched. So I entered this competition thrilled to be thinking about these big ideas. And for the movement, I wanted to show what it was like, what it felt like to march. And I imagined as you went in, there was this plaza, there was enough room for 1,500 concrete tiles on the ground where footprints could be printed in the concrete, but not side by side feet standing there, but in stride so that one foot is ahead of the other. So when you'd look at all these hundreds and hundreds of footprints, they're all moving, they're marching. They're like spirits. There's no people there, but you can walk in their footprints. They're all moving off in that direction. And there, where they go, is a statue, a bronze statue of Martin Luther King. Now, to respect the 10-foot height limit, I realized this statue can't be any bigger than he was. There's no room to do a heroic statue. But the transformational thing that I wanted to do was to show him pushing through barriers. So I imagined him stepping through a stone wall. He's 80% out. His leg is still back in the wall, his arm, but he's walking out with confidence. He has pushed through the barrier. He has transformed his situation. And for the message on the wall, his greatest speech, considered the iconic speech of the 20th century in America, was his "I have a dream" speech. In that speech, he repeated that 8 times. So when you came in, I have this 10-foot wall that holds us in between the lake and the cherry trees. I have a dream, and then keep repeating it, however, each time in a different language, from languages from all over the world, every continent, so that it's truly international. If you can dream, if you can walk the walk, you too can push through barriers. I worked on this thing for about 10 weeks preparing the drawings. I have to say, I've never had more fun in my life designing. I just was into it. I could feel it. It made me happy. It made me feel better. I submitted the drawings in March, mailed them off to Washington, D.C. I'm done. I did what I was here to do. Okay, there's more to the story. First week of June, doorbell rings. There's a FedEx guy, wants my signature. There's a cardboard envelope with one of those cardboard zippers. I open it up. I pull out this letter from the competition committee. 12 designs, including mine, have been selected as finalists. They still have to choose the final, but we are finalists. There were nearly 1,000 submittals. Man, I hardly knew what to do. It was so exciting. And now it's a two-stage competition, so they wrote more questions for me to answer. I responded. I sent that in, and then something changed. Up to then, it really, truly had been about the movement, the man, the message. All of a sudden, it became about me. I thought, this design of mine has got to win. I know there's a few others, but hey, I know I've got this thing. I know it's mine. I didn't say anything to my family. I didn't say anything to my friends. All that conversation was inside my head. And for 2 months, I kept saying, I'm famous. It's all that remains to happen is for me to become famous. Magazines are going to write articles about me. Talk show hosts are going to want me on their show. And my ultimate dream, I want to be the correct response to a Jeopardy question. Who is Nick Newberry? Yes, that's the ultimate. Okay, there's more to the story. First week of August, I come back from the mailbox, stack of letters. There's an envelope, an ordinary envelope with an ordinary stamp from the competition committee. Where's the FedEx envelope? I open it up, thanking me for my participation and informing me that the Roma design group in San Francisco has had their design selected. Have you ever watched the Academy Awards? And they say the winner is Tom Hanks or Meryl Streep, and all the other nominees go, oh, we're here for you. Oh, I know what's going on inside all of those other nominees. Oh, I know the pain. Or do you watch the Olympics? There's the athlete with the gold medal. And 1 step down, the silver, 2 steps down, the bronze, silver, bronze. I know your pain. You're only 1/100th of a second different. Who cares? You should have been here, right? Oh, it was painful to get that close. 10 years later, took me that long to get to this. Maya Angelou, the poet, said something about Martin Luther King, and it made me stop and realize that message is for me. She said, Martin Luther King had no arrogance. He had humility that was deep inside. And I thought, man, I remember that summer. I just walked out on my own path. I was standing knee-deep in the water in my imagination of arrogance. I had lost humility. So I recommend, anytime you're in Washington, D.C., go see the Martin Luther King Memorial. It's been done now for 10 years. Of course, over 10 years of design development, it evolved into other things and then was constructed. So if you go there, you're going to see something totally different than what I just talked about, something that is totally wonderful, but works for all kinds of different reasons. When you go in, the iconic element is a 30-foot tall statue carved in white granite of Martin Luther King. He is strong. He is powerful. He's standing firm with his arms crossed on his chest. He's defiant, and he's looking out at the horizon through the space created in the cherry trees. Everyone that goes there is moved by the experience. It is tremendous. And now, you know, for me, what almost was.
Nick, thank you so much for your wonderful story of what almost was and humility. And I'm sorry that your design for the monument didn't pan out, but tell us about some projects that did pan out for you.
Well, I suppose I've entered half a dozen other design competitions. I didn't win any of them. A couple of them I didn't particularly care for the design I sent in. A couple I really liked. I did win a competition here in Phoenix. It had to have been 5 years ago, put on by the AIA, calling for ideas, creative ideas for what to do with the developments along the canals. And I drew something as fast as I could, sent it in because there was a deadline. Frankly, I don't think very many people sent in anything on that. And I was driving to California, my phone rang, and I have to admit, I answered the phone in the car, and someone informed me that I'd won, and I was going to get $50. I never got the $50, but I won that one.
That's awesome. Well, before we move on to the question and answer segment of tonight's show, I have a folktale for you, a folktale that my mother had told us. So when I was about ready to graduate from high school, I wanted to be an engineer. And when I got admission into two of the most prestigious engineering schools in Karachi, Pakistan, I was so excited. But when I told my parents about it, my father told my mother to tell me that I was too young to go to a co-ed school and that I needed to go back to an all-girls school to get my bachelor's degree. I was furious. I cried, I wailed, I fussed. And then my mother asked me, "Are you asking for cabbage magos, cabbage and meat stew?" And I immediately calmed down. Now, you are probably wondering, what does cabbage magos, cabbage and meat stew, have to do with getting admission into a university or even what almost was? Well, you see, when we were younger, my mother had told us this story about this little girl who was very simple and naive. And her experience extended only to her family and maybe into her neighborhood. She didn't know what was out there in the world, what opportunities were out there. And one day, the little girl's father comes home, and he's so excited, and he gathers the family, and he tells them that he's got this opportunity to go to this exotic land for work. And he asks them, each of them, and what they would like for him to bring back with him as a gift. And he turns to his wife, the little girl's mother, and he asks, "My dear, what would you like for me to bring for you as a gift from this exotic land?" And the little girl's mother thinks for a while, and then she says, "Bring me some spices from this exotic land, saffron and cardamom and nutmeg, so that at the next holiday I can make the most aromatic dishes and be the envy of the whole neighborhood." And the father writes that down in his diary. And then he turns to the little girl's elder sister, and he asks her, "My dear, what can I bring for you from this exotic land as a gift?" And the little girl's elder sister thinks for a little bit, and then she says, "Father, bring me the softest silk and the most shiny satin and the most colorful brocade. So at the next holiday, I can make the most glamorous dress and be the envy of the whole neighborhood." And the father writes that down in his diary. And then the father turns to the little girl and he asks her, "My dear, what can I bring you from the exotic land as a gift?" And the little girl doesn't have to think at all. And she says, "Bring me cabbage magos, cabbage and meat stew," because that's her favorite thing. So all my mother had to do whenever there was a missed opportunity or something that had fallen through for us is ask if we were limiting ourselves to just cabbage magos. My mother isn't with us anymore. But even now, whenever my sister or I get stuck with and get attached to results that don't go our way, like maybe a closing on a house falling through, or a car deal not coming through, or even a lost opportunity for a job. And when we fuss and wail, all we have to do is ask, are you asking for cabbage mangoes? I hope you enjoyed that story. And whenever there's an opportunity for you that almost was, you ask yourself, are you asking for cabbage mangoes? Thank you. Now that we've heard all the stories tonight, we'll move on to the discussion and Q&A part of the show. We'll start with a few questions from ASU Care for everyone here to answer. If you have any questions for one particular storyteller or all of us, please drop those questions in the chat. This is your opportunity to drive the conversation with our guests and get to know our storytellers. Please share your thoughts. So Mario, I'm going to start with you with the first question, and then we'll take a turn to answer. All three of us will take a turn to answer that question. So Mario, how did you craft this story, What Almost Was? And how did you decide that this is the story you were going to tell tonight? Was there another story that came to your mind? And if there was, what was it?
So I thought of the story. I was trying to think of different stories that had to deal with music, and like I said, I love music, and I thought of getting into storytelling, and I was like, well, I almost didn't do storytelling at all. When I went to the school, I just almost didn't do it. I did that one story, and I wasn't going to do anything else. And so I thought of, well, what almost was? What would it be like if I didn't get there? And so I thought of the different stories, and I thought of the beatboxing. And then I thought of, well, what would it be like if music was just instruments, if they didn't have beatboxing at all? Where would we be? And would it be boring, or like a lot of people didn't think of beatboxing as music at all? And so I put those two together, and then that's how I came up with the story.
That's how you crafted it. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Same question for you, Nick. How did you go about crafting the story?
When I heard the theme for tonight, What Almost Was, I instantly thought of this Martin Luther King memorial story, just because it lingered somewhere inside me for so many years. And it's really not quite a story. There aren't characters back and forth, but it's a story in my head of what I was saying to myself. I have to talk about a lot of abstract concepts. I almost didn't do it. And then I thought, you know what? I'm so immersed in that feeling of that moment or that year in my life that's my story. I got to tell it. I think when I think about other things that what almost was, I'm never quite sure what the other path would have been. I only know what actually happened. For example, when I came to Arizona to go to ASU, probably could have had other options just as good, but I came here from California and ended up staying. So I don't know what almost was. What almost was is a whole nother story, which is probably fiction.
Oh. For me, I think, Nick, it's kind of the same. When I heard that the theme was What Almost Was, this story just came to me. And those of you who are avid readers know that you don't pick the book picks you. And I find that very often with storytelling, I don't pick the story picks me. And this story picked me because it wanted to be told. So, Mario, there's a question from Colleen for you, and she asks, can you teach beatboxing?
I could teach a little bit of beatboxing. Um, so I think the easiest instrument to do for beatboxing is probably the snare drum. So if you the snare drums and the cymbals. So with the cymbals, you hear the tss, and that's just like the T sound. And so if you pick a beat with the cymbal and you do that, you do that T, and then you sum that up with the at the end of it like a snake, and then you have that for the cymbal. And then for the snare drum, you pretty much just put your lips together and just, and when you push out the air, you end with the and that's how you get the snare drum. So it's and if you put the snare drum and the cymbal together, you get the you put that to a beat. And that's how that's the easiest.
It sounds easier. than, but I hope, Colleen, you're going to try it at home. And if by the end of the show you've tried it, let us know how it went.
Yeah.
So she does have a question also for all of us. And that is, what was the story you almost told tonight but did not? So Nick, I'll start with you this time. Was there a story?
My brother passed away in December. He's 7 years older than me. When I got out of college, I had a choice to stay here in Arizona and pursue architecture, or to go back where I grew up in Hollywood. My father and my brother were art directors, and I knew enough about how it worked over there, the talent base needed, and with the skills I had, having gone through college in architecture, I knew I could get a job over there. I wasn't jinxed by the idea that I couldn't go there and find work. So I was really on the fence about, do I pursue architecture or do I pursue the movies art direction? Well, obviously I stayed here in Arizona, but here's the deal. My brother took the path not taken for me. So I vicariously lived this other path for, all of his life, as long as it lasted. He was an art director on movies, on TV. He was a designer on theme parks. He worked on motion capture movies. He did it all. In fact, he got a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Oh, wow.
He got the award. I'm very proud of my brother. I'm very sorry that cancer was not his best friend last year. So I look at my brother like, not that he passed, but that he's sort of the mirror image that I would have taken, which I did not.
For me, like I said earlier, this story, this folktale, it just came to my mind, and I did look at another folktale, but it just was not. I didn't feel the delight in telling it. Like, I hope I was able to pass on the delight of telling that story. So, yeah. How about you, Mario?
I was actually going to tell the story of, I was going through all these stories, and music actually wasn't the first one that came to mind. The first one that came to mind was, it was a fact-based story about D.B. Cooper. And D.B. Cooper is like this legend where this man, he robbed, I think it was like a bank or something, and then in Seattle, and he got away with it. He got on this plane, and then he had all this money, and he jumped out, and nobody knew where it was. And so I was thinking about telling the story, but then I was like, the thing was like, what almost was? They almost caught him, but they didn't. And I was like, well, maybe that's not a good thing to to go about, because it's kind of like cheating, and it's talk about like robbing and like crime and get away with it, and I was like, that's not cool. So I chose something else.
Uh, well, May has a question for all of us, and it is, did we know each other before tonight? And I'll go ahead and answer that first. I know Mario. Mario and I have been in classes together. We've done storytelling together. So I didn't know Mario, but it has been a pleasure to meet Nick the first time today.
Yes, it's definitely a pleasure to meet Nick. Like Diana said, I've been in classes with her. I love movies and animation, so I'm sure I've either have some of your brothers like movies, or I've watched them. But yeah, it was very nice to meet you.
Thank you. The only person I knew in this, well, of course my wife's here, but the only person in this room I knew before tonight is Tracy Mason over here, the manager of the Care Cultural Center. And when I first met her, I think I was around you off and on for at least a year when I realized I knew her when she was 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
Her mother, I specialized as an architectural illustrator, and so did her mom, Lucy.
Oh.
And Lucy worked in our office sometimes. And she would bring Tracy in sometimes at night when she was a little girl, and she'd sleep under the desk while her mom worked. So there's my story. I know she's not right here front and center, but she's right there. I've known her since she was 10 years old. She was a great kid.
That's a great story.
That is cool. That's really cool.
We have another question from Colleen, and she asks, what advice do you give to young storytellers? Mario, would you like to take that first?
Oh, okay. Well, I've taught classes for high school boys with one of the guests that was here before, Dr. Travis May. And so we taught like young high school boys. And one of the advice that we would always tell them is, like you said, let the story come to you. You don't pick the story picks you. And they will always have like troubles of, well, I don't know what to do, and I don't know how this story coincides with what I'm thinking or what it has to do with me. And so, for example, one of the kids, we're telling them to do personal stories. He's like, well, my life isn't that interesting, blah, 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 I don't know what to do. And so we talked to him. Okay, tell us something crazy that might have happened that other people like would just think is just out of nowhere. And then he told us about, he said, last month there was a truck that crashed into our house, and we have it all on video.
Oh my God.
And we're like, there's a story behind that. Tell that story. And so he's like, well, I don't know if I could tell that. It happened to you.
Yeah.
You could tell the story. And so he told the story. He did great.
Yeah.
And everybody in the class had the same reaction we did, was, you had a truck go to your house. What? And yeah. So yeah, I always tell them, let the story come to you just like naturally. Don't try to force it. Just let it come. Yeah.
That's great advice. Nick, do you have any advice?
Sure. I don't know why I'm a storyteller. I was the shyest kid in the world. I don't think I said much to anybody till I was working in a grocery store when I was 15 years old and had to say hi and bye to the customers. However, as I've mentioned earlier, I've specialized as an illustrator, and an illustration, a drawing, is a big picture that tells a story. It's, in a sense, it's a storyboard. And there's the dark foreground and the light and things that nuance your senses. So at least when I craft a story, I'm seeing it. I'm very visual, and I have to use my hands all the time. I can't imagine telling a story without having shapes and high and low in it. Got to keep this on my nose. So I guess my advice is, you may not be an illustrator, but I'm sure everyone has drawn. And when you're trying to tell a story, maybe draw stick figures and the street and the map and sort of immerse yourself into the place so that you see it. And then you're not trying to remember your words, you're remembering what you see.
Yeah, that's great advice. One of the things we teach in the Art of Storytelling class is storyboarding, and some of our students are not great artists, but like me, and you just draw stick figures. For me, I would say that don't worry about who you're telling the story to. Just enjoy telling the story. If you find delight in telling the story, the listener is also going to find delight in hearing your story. And just think like you're sitting across the person at your dining table or in your living room and telling them about, like Mario said, about an event that happened, whether it was a truck crashing into your house or your grandmother coming to visit, and just enjoy it. So there is another question from the staff here, I believe, and they ask if we have any recommendations for good stories, storytellers, films, books, or even musicians that can tell vivid tales.
Ooh.
Do you want to take it, Nick?
Yeah, I'd let you go first.
My brother who worked at movies, he said every good story has a murder. Of course, he's thinking about movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's always a pivot point. And the pivot point would seemingly have to do with the action of the story, but it's usually a pivot in your heart. And it's being able to tell a story, but to find the emotion that goes into it. And even though you're shy and weren't raised to express emotion, there's a point in your story, no matter how much you keep it contained, where you do have to bust and get bigger. I think a good storyteller can tell a simple, basically uninteresting story, just so long as when the aha moment comes, they come alive, and then they can shut down after that. I think that's my best formula.
Oh. How about you, Mario? Do you have any recommendations?
As far as storytellers, well,
Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna put it in. I'm gonna put a plug in there. South Mountain Storytelling Institute has some really good storytellers. Dr. May, Liz Warren, Professor Marilyn Torres.
Yeah.
Both of us are from
So we are both
students
students
of South Mountain Community College Storytelling Institute. But like besides that, like the movies, like Nick said, as far as the stories go, it just has to capture you. For me, I love animation. Animation is part of a world that exists, but it doesn't exist. It exists in your mind, but it doesn't exist physically. And I love comic books, and I love Star Wars. Love Star Wars. And Joseph Campbell, he has, I guess you could say he invented or structured the hero's journey.
Yeah.
And so Star Wars and a lot of these movies have to do with the hero's journey. I can't explain the hero's journey right now. We don't have time.
Yeah.
Look it up. Google it. But any story for me that has the hero's journey in it is a really good story. And as far as like music, there's a lot of, I listen to Wu-Tang Clan a lot. Was a hip hop group, but a lot of country artists tell really good stories. Blake Shelton, Chris Stapleton, and a lot of folk tales. Their music is just out there. Just make sure it hits you in the heart. If it hits you in the heart, it hits you emotionally, it's gonna be a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I cannot give any musical recommendations because I'm tone deaf, but I'll kind of piggyback on what Mario said, and again, plug South Mountain Community College, but he mentioned Joseph Campbell and Joseph Campbell's structure of the hero's journey. But there is also a heroine's journey structure. And I've been reading about that recently, and that has, stories have their various structures that storytellers use for crafting their stories. And when you know those structures, when you watch movies, you'll start noticing them. And like Mario just said, that the Star Wars is basically hero's journey. In fact, it's a known fact that George Lucas consulted with Joseph Campbell for those stories. So yeah, so if you're interested in finding good stories, my recommendation would be to actually find a structure that you like. And then when you find a favorite structure, then when you're watching movies or reading books, or I'm sure listening to songs and music, you will find the stories that you find attractive. So we have one last question. Second to last question. And this question comes from Colleen, and she asks, do we think the pandemic has brought out more storytellers, poets, etc., creativity? Mario?
I think so. A lot of the storytellers have just been in the house, and they've just been bubbling with all these emotions and all this creativity, and they just want to get out. And so we were talking about it earlier.
Yes,
a lot of the people on YouTube have just come out, done their stories, and TikTok has just blown up with those 2-minute stories that people have done. I think it's great.
Yeah, yeah. What's your thought on it, Nick?
I think storytelling was picking up speed even before the pandemic because it's just basic old storytelling. I know we got microphones and everything here, but storytelling, you really don't need anything. You just engage someone else. Yeah. However, with the pandemic and Zoom and other ways to interface with people, suddenly there's a whole wider format for these simple storytelling methods, and so I think it's probably grown at a quantum level. But there's just nothing better than good old storytelling.
Yeah, I would agree that that the pandemic lockdown, I think, gave people an opportunity to stop doing what they were doing and what was crowding their lives, and were able to use that time to bring out their creativity, right? And that's why I think we've seen so many storytellers and poets and musicians on TikTok and YouTube and Zoom. So I would definitely agree with that. So I'm going to close with a question that I have for both of you. And if you would like to throw it back at me, you're most welcome to do that. So today, both of you shared a personal story with us. Are there other forms of stories that you have either in your repertoire or enjoy telling or even listening to? Nick?
I've written plays and basically historic plays, writing about Mark Twain and Frank Lloyd Wright and Gottschalk, who was a favorite American piano player of mine. But there's something in their story, in their biography, that I just love. And there's usually that point where I know that right there is a great story to be told. But I feel it, and in a way I recognize it somehow from my life experience. So I'm telling their story, but I'm actually sort of telling my story.
Yes.
And I think that's just true. In history, biography, anything like that, you always got to take in mind the point of view of the writer.
Yeah, I completely agree that even with fact-based stories like biographies, those two, as a storyteller, when you're telling those have to resonate with you in some way. Yeah. How about you, Mario?
Well, I have to agree with Nick. I love like fact-based stories
Yeah.
and history. Some of those just like get to me. I love the stories of like World War II and everything. I will admit I like conspiracy stories.
Yeah.
Those are really interesting to me. My favorite ones are like folk tales and legends.
Yes.
Um, and I love like the stories of like people being larger than life.
Yes.
And then
Heroes.
like the stories of like the origins and animals talking.
Yeah.
I think that's like, yeah,
For
fables
sure.
and folk tales and fairy tales. I love them. I love them all.
Love storytelling. Right?
I love storytelling.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then what about?
So interestingly, when I started storytelling, I thought that I really like personal stories, and probably because they're much easier to craft. But as I've studied and kind of told more stories, I've noticed I have my repertoire, and I've noticed that there are more and more folk tales in it. And initially, I had a real aversion to folk tales, and then I took a class with Liz Warren, and that
Yeah.
converted me. And I love folk tales. So yeah, that's my favorite type of story to tell.
Sweet.
So thank you so much to the audience for circling up with us for Gather this month and chatting with our fabulous Arizona storytellers. I've personally had a great time sharing my story with you and being tonight's host. We have so much gratitude for Mario and Nick, and for you, our awesome audience, for supporting Gather and our storytellers tonight. The next monthly Gather event will be Wednesday, July 28th at 6:30 p.m. These shows are always on the last Wednesday of the month. The theme for next month's show is It's a Tradition. Watch just as you've done today on ASU Care's YouTube channel, Facebook Live, or Twitch. We recommend that you subscribe to ASU Care's YouTube channel right now so you won't miss any of the venue's musical and storytelling streams. ASU Care is a self-sustaining venue that has been presenting free live-streamed arts programming since April of last year. The venue made it a point to focus on creating paid performance opportunities for Arizona musicians and storytellers, and to help keep the transformative power of the arts alive for its audiences. ASU Care receives no funding from the university or state, and like so many other facilities, has had zero income for the last 15 months. They need you, and they need your help to reopen their doors this fall. If you have the means to do so, we would be honored if you'd stop by asucare.com on your way off your device tonight and click the gold Give Now button at the top of the page to donate to ASU Care. You will be helping sustain artists, the arts, and a one-of-a-kind historic venue, and ensuring that it can connect communities with the beauty of the arts for decades to come. Thanks again for tuning in, and good night.